Hello and welcome to another episode of 100 Words or Less, the podcast. I am your host, Ray Harkins, and episode number 20. This is awesome. Things are going. We appreciate it. And when I say we appreciate it, I mean I appreciate it, and I appreciate you, the listener, taking the time to hang out, download this, listen to this. However you are consuming this, I appreciate that. Just want to get some business out of the way. Punk News Podcast Network. We are a part of that. You should go check out punknews.org if you already don't. And if you don't, you are completely fucking up. Actually, not completely, just sort of. But go check it out because they have all of the latest and greatest news, music reviews, like every Tuesday. So basically, when you get this episode, go visit punknews.org. You can find new music reviews every Tuesday. As well as a bunch of other awesome podcasts that they do there. So check it out. We are proud to be a part of that. Two other things. Review the show on iTunes. If you do have anywhere between 2 to 4 minutes in your day and you're in front of the computer, pop on iTunes, write something about the show, good or bad, preferably good. And that way, it gives people a little insight to the show that may look at the show and be like, I don't know if I should like this, but hey, I read this review from X awesome dude X. They said they liked it, so I'll check it out. So do that. And if you have 30 seconds, you can also just click on the 5-star rating system. You don't even have to leave a review. Just click how many stars you feel this show is worth, and it'll calculate that, and that's awesome. So the more reviews we get, the more iTunes juice we get, and hopefully one day we'll be as popular as This American Life, which would be awesome, but that'll be a few years off. And last, and certainly not least, 100wordspodcast.com. Drop by the site. You'll be able to field recommendations from music and movies and kind of whatever else that I'm not really able to share on the podcast. I try to post daily, so that way you'll be able to kind of see what either myself or some of our guests are recommending. So yeah, check it out. And if you're a Tumblr person, you can follow the blog via that service. And so there we go. Business out of the way. And before I talk about our guest, I wanted to talk about something random that I'm going to be doing soon that I think is funny and pretty interesting in a way. So there's a television show called How the States Got Their Shape. And I don't know if any of you have watched it, but I watched, 3 or 4 episodes of the first season, and it was awesome. It's a really cool show, basically about the story behind the story of America in regards to the way that, or why people live in certain areas of the country, and why these states look like they do. And it's just stuff that you really don't think of on a day-to-day basis unless you're a complete history nerd, which I'm not, but no slight against history nerds. But yeah, this show definitely just kind of boils it down, puts it in context in a very entertaining way. So lo and behold, I'm going to be on that show. They're doing a show in Vegas. I don't know if the whole entire show is centered on Las Vegas, but I myself was born there, and they were looking for a person who is straight edge, which is myself, and born in Vegas. Like I said, that's myself. So yeah, I'm going to be doing something. I know that I'm going to be doing a quiz, which will be funny, on general Nevada / Las Vegas knowledge, and I will be competing against what I'm told is a bartender. And I guess the idea of why I would be on the show is the fact that someone can come from an environment like Las Vegas, booze and drugs and strip clubs and all that type of stuff. Not condoning any of that, because I personally don't do that. But if you do that stuff, your decision, no judgment whatsoever. But anyways, so yeah, they're kind of doing the juxtaposition of that. Like, how could a person come from this environment and not be interested in any of that? So yeah, it's going to be a really interesting experience, and I will inform all of you fine folk if I do make the cut and don't miss a million questions. If I do miss questions, all the questions, then I will not inform you of when it airs because I don't want to be too embarrassed. But then again, you'll probably see it in some way, shape, or form. So anyways, that is what is exciting that is coming up for me that I will fill all you fine folk in. The guest this week is Craig Ericson, the owner, CEO, proprietor, whatever you like to call him, of Rise Records. And a lot of you probably have opinions on Rise Records and either how it's awesome or it sucks or whatever. I really hope that even if you do hate Rise Records, that you do listen to Craig and kind of get to know him, and because he really is very candid with me on why he does what he does and why he signs so many different bands of so many different genres, and he tries to dispel a lot of the hate and myths that sometimes go tossed around about this label. I personally enjoy Craig, and whether or not I enjoy 100% of the bands that he puts out, that's irrelevant. But I do think that what he does is cool, and it's I think needed within the musical culture, that he's able to put out bands like Hot Water Music and then put out bands like Abandon All Ships, where it's like they would never be hanging out ever in the same room, but because they're on a label, there's some sort of camaraderie there. But in any event, it's a very enlightening conversation, and I hope you take the time to dissect it and form your own opinion, because after all, that's what this is all about. So you'll hear us as we're talking about how I first met Craig and how I was going to work for Rise Records at one point. There, I went and said it. So yeah, you'll get to hear a little bit of that and the rest of the interview. So thank you very much and enjoy.
Open windows, I'm passing these open windows, passing these open windows.
So yeah, usually I like to start things off with like my own personal experience with either the label or yourself or whatever. And I remember our first, obviously, real conversations between you and I were, when I was working at Century Media / Abacus, and we were talking about, you were looking for, or you were entertaining the idea of doing different distribution deals. I'm sure at that time it was like, you were talking to probably a million different people, because Rise was obviously, pardon the pun, but on the rise, where people were paying attention to the label in ways that kind of never had happened before, right?
Correct, definitely.
So I just always, it kind of blew my mind when I first started to talk to you, where it was like, essentially at that time, and this, we're talking like maybe 2002 or something like that. And it blew my mind that it was basically just you and one other person. And
yeah, totally, man.
And that just like, did you always want to kind of basically have that super, super tight knit, just like, I don't want to hire a staff of like 30 people, not like, 30 is ridiculous, but like 8 people.
Yeah.
Did you always have that in mind?
Never. I mean, I didn't think about it too much, but I always felt like the more employees you have, the more headaches and stress of just personnel, and just, it gets to be complicated when you have a lot of people working on things. And right now we have like 4 people, including myself. And, I feel like, to be honest, I kind of like the size we're at, really not looking to expand, because right now everything is running how I ideally like it to. It's like a boutique, record label. We sign bands, and we work them hard, and, it's just 4 of us, and it's our communication is awesome, and we all know what's going on, and it's just a little easier, man. It makes life a little less stressful, kind of like a stress-free life. So
yeah, no, and that's funny, because I honestly never really think about it from that perspective of like, once you do hire more people, that's like, you obviously essentially being the owner, you're the manager of everybody, but it's like, yeah, when you do get to the point where it's just like, most of my time is spent with like employee evaluations and like the sort of, human resources stuff. And it's like, you don't want to do that.
I'm in it for the music, and so are my guys that I hired, and it's awesome. So.
Yeah, no, that's going back, that's kind of that's what sort of impressed me, and that obviously inspired me to be like, hey, Craig, I want to work with you. And obviously
I know, dude. I remember that. I think our geography was the main issue. You not being able to move from LA, and me just needing someone in house with me. So
no, totally. And there was obviously no love lost. It just didn't.
Oh yeah, totally.
It was one of those things where it's like usually I find myself, when I do find something that is like interesting for me to work with, it's like I always bring up the idea to people. I'm definitely not like, oh, I'll wait around and maybe if they think I'm a reasonable human, they'll try to talk to me. But I just remember having those discussions with you, and it was cool. Then obviously, like when I came through on tour, we met up and had dinner or lunch or whatever.
Yeah.
And then I got to know you a little bit, and then it was the thing that also struck me was like, people obviously have a conception of what Rise Records is, and preconceived notions and whatever. And then hearing, your own personal musical taste, where you're just like, yeah, I got into music, like, some of your favorite bands were like, obviously like the East Bay punk bands, like Jawbreaker and stuff like that.
Yep, for sure.
And I imagine that most people wouldn't put two and two together based off of what you've personally released,
Right. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, no. So it kind of took me back, and so, anyways, so that's I'm setting the table for everybody. But
okay.
Where were you always kind of born and raised in the Pacific Northwest area, or where was your upbringing?
Okay, the upbringing was grew up in Southern California. I was born in Riverside, lived there for like a year while my dad was in residency. Then we moved to Scripps Ranch outside of San Diego for a few years, and then I moved to Los Angeles, which is right near your hood, and lived there for a couple years. And then in kindergarten, first grade, I moved up to Northern California in Nevada City, which is near Lake Tahoe, in between Sacramento and Lake Tahoe. And that's where I pretty much grew up all through, up until college.
Yeah. So what did your parents do? You mentioned your dad was in residency.
Yep, my dad's a doctor, and he was a doctor up in Nevada City.
Oh, nice.
Internist. Yep.
What did he? What specific specialty, I guess?
Yeah, he was an internist, so just a family practitioner / internist. So he did a little bit of everything, actually.
Sure. And were your parents together, or were you raised primarily by your dad?
Nope, together. They still together now, and they live in Portland near me, and I'm very close with them still. So it's cool to have them around.
Oh, that's
nearby.
Nice. Did they make the move up to Portland kind of after you had been up there, or was it?
They moved first, actually, and it's kind of funny because we both kind of argue who wanted to move to Portland first, because I had always wanted to, and my dad was kind of getting burned out of his doctor stuff in Nevada City and got a job for a hospital up in Portland, and they moved there first and kind of was like, beat me to it.
So it was a race to Portland.
Yeah, kind of. So I followed shortly after, just by circumstance. It's a cool city, man. I've traveled up here a couple times and just really liked it. I was in California my whole life and wanted to try something new, get out, and Portland's pretty close by relatively, so
yeah, no, definitely
started to do it.
Definitely. What did your mom do? Did she stay at home and help raise you?
Yeah, pretty much. She helped my dad at the office. She was like, one of the office people.
Sure.
Helped with books, QuickBooks stuff.
Sure.
Back when they wrote it on paper, probably.
Yeah, exactly. back when they used a tablet and stone, right?
I know. Jeez, no doubt.
What did so do you have any brothers and sisters?
Yep, I have a brother, 3 years older. He lives in Oklahoma. He's a lawyer, like an assistant DA in Tulsa.
Nice. You definitely have a lot of different backgrounds within the family that obviously you could lean on your mom to help you out with like finance stuff with the label probably when you were first forming and like.
Yeah, no doubt. The doctor is handy, for obvious reasons, and the law comes in handy too. So I've definitely seek advice from everyone, and it's doesn't hurt. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you're like you said, your formative years were definitely like in you said, what city was it again?
Nevada City.
Nevada
it was,
City.
Yeah, right outside of Sacramento, up in the hills, and it's like a 2.5-hour drive to Berkeley, hour drive to Sacramento. So to go to shows when I was a kid, I had to drive, a little bit, but it's no big deal.
Yeah. I remember, I definitely remember when I was, a teenager, and the idea of driving to a show like 2 to 2.5 hours away was like not even a problem. I would be like, oh yeah,
No doubt.
you just got to go to a show, of course.
Totally.
Whereas now it'd be like, yeah, if it's within like 20 minutes, that's cool.
No doubt. So true.
Yeah. So when you, basically, as you started to kind of go through school and high school and everything, this is a 2-part question, but one, like, how was your high school experience? Where what sort of stereotype did you kind of fit in with? Did you play a lot of sports? Were you kind of a nerdy indoor kid, or like what was your experience from that? And then second part would be kind of what introduced you to independent music to kind of begin with.
Sure. My high school was pretty cool. Nevada Union High School. I graduated in like 1991, and it was pretty cool. We had a lot of diverse little groups in our high school, but they're all like cool with each other. And, I would have fallen into the music, punk rock kid, skateboarder, surfer dude that played high school sports. So I was like the dude that skated, but yet still did sports. I did like tennis. I was on the ski team.
Whoa,
I played
the ski team. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it was awesome. Like we won the whole state too.
Oh wow,
pretty badass.
That's awesome.
Yep. We got to skip school once in the winter every Tuesday and like go race at Squaw Valley or wherever, and so that was sweet actually.
Yeah.
So yeah, I did did some sports. Always been pretty active, but now I'm pretty much just a surfer guy. That's my main activity I do.
Yeah, that's what you focus on. I mean, that's ski team is essentially what like surf team is, obviously down here in Southern California, where it's like, kids go to, they enroll in their class and they go in at 5 a.m. They show up before school to get their surfing in and then go there. But ski team sounds a little bit more luxurious in a way.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It was free to ski, and man, if you'd crash in a race, you just got to go free ski with your buddy. So
if
I were to crash, I'd be like, oh no, I just get to go jump all day. So
yeah, bummer. And so in general, your high school experience was good. Like you sound kind of like a floater, where you were able to get along with people in different.
Yeah, totally. I had friends that were jocks, and I was probably more on the skater was intertwined with the punk dudes. Like a lot of dudes were in bands, and we had a really good local scene,
Yeah.
Which was, pretty typical actually. And, I was all a part of that. And, obviously pre-internet. So it was pre-cell phone era. So it was a little, you did flyers and you played parties, and, it's fun stuff, man. And, I put out my first record in high school. My senior year, Rise 1. So I was involved, enough to like, want to experiment with a little business and,
yeah,
the music industry. It was cool.
That's cool. So did you, because basically you look at people who run independent labels, and it's like they fall into one category. They fall into they like music, but they really are into the business side of things, or two, they're a failed musician. What do you find? And when I say failed, like I don't mean that as a derogatory term, obviously.
Totally. I would go the first one, just like music and the business, because I'm not a performer. I would know when I feel comfortable getting on stage and doing my thing. So
yeah.
definitely love the industry side of it,
Sure.
So,
and did you what was your introduction to kind of independent music? Like, was it your
what? It was, I had an older brother, 3 years older than me, that had a friend named Matt Griffith which actually he was the singer of the band I first signed Up to Here, which was Rise One.
Oh, nice.
So, and he had cousins in San Diego that listened to Black Flag and Minor Threat and DI and Misfits and 7 Seconds. So when he would go on a Southern California road trip from NorCal, he would come back with all these tapes, and then my brother would get them and he would play them like when he would, So, and that would be like my 5th or 6th grade is when I first started hearing Misfits, 7 Seconds, Dead Kennedys,
Sure.
and started liking it. And, then I started buying music myself, like Misfits tapes and 7 Seconds and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah.
And my first show was in 8th grade. It was that Revelation Records tour of '88. It was Youth of Today in bold. And they came to my little town. Yeah, they came to my little town, and I had no idea who they were because a local band opened and everyone was going to the show, and I had no idea who they were. And I was like floored. I'm like, holy shit.
Yeah.
These guys are freaking awesome. I remember them playing Break Down the Walls. Like, that's the only thing I remember about the whole show.
Sure.
I remember everyone moshing and them jumping around, but the one song I remember was like, Break Down the Walls. So awesome. So ever since I saw that show, I was like, this shit's freaking awesome.
Yeah.
And,
that was basically like your tipping point. Like once you saw that, you're like, oh, there's no other thing I'm going to pay attention to.
I agree, because I love heavy music. I like fast music, and I like good lyrics, and I don't like, there's other parts of heavy music that's not punk that I'm not necessarily a fan of. So it was just like right up my alley. I'm like, shit, dude, these guys look like skateboard dudes. They don't look all crazy weird, and they play heavy ass shit. That's awesome. So it's like, sign me up.
Yeah,
so,
that's really cool. That's really cool.
Yeah. Yep. So that was the tipping point. So
nice. And so then as you were going through high school, and obviously you started once that show hit, then you started to get into everything else and started to travel to shows. And so putting out a record your senior year is definitely, it's ambitious because I look at myself and it's like, when I was playing in bands, like towards, I was playing in bands sophomore, junior and senior year. And like by default, I put out like, Taken's first demo and Taken's 7-inch just because, I didn't know how to talk to a record label. So it definitely was like, but the fact that you were like, hey, like I never wanted to be like, hey, I'm going to launch a record label. It was like, hey, I'm going to put out my band stuff. So what gave you the idea where it's just like, all right, did you want to do it just based on the fact you wanted to help your older brother's friend? Or was it just like, hey, I really want to kind of, give this a try as a business plan, so to speak?
It was definitely a mix of the two.
Okay.
Because I started collecting vinyl and started getting interest in record labels and how they're branding and stuff. So I was like intrigued by record labels a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And this band Up to Here was just so good. And I just felt like, man, this band needs a record. And it's like, well, if no one else is going to do it, I'm going to do it. And I just like stepped up to the plate, and they were like, sure, if you want to, man. And, I got help. Like Kevin Seconds from 7 Seconds was like the dude that helped me like talk to Nashville Record Pressing and figure out how to get it on DAT and like who to talk to. So he kind of helped me.
Really?
Yeah, totally.
That's amazing. So basically you can say, Kevin Seconds helped Rise Records get their start.
Yeah. And he later re-released that Rise One on his record label, Eating Blur Records. He put out some records on Eating Blur, and he re-released Up to Here. So even back then, as like an 18-year-old kid, like my mentor, Kevin Seconds, like re-released my record. So I was like, holy shit, man, that's freaking awesome.
Right.
So,
that's incredible.
Yeah. So I had some good luck right away, because it's a really good album. It's a mix of like Dag Nasty meets Descendants. It's like super catchy and edgy. It's really good.
That's awesome. And so
yeah, it still holds up today too, man.
Yeah. Like you can listen to it and be like, that's not that dated.
No doubt. It's like nothing you'd be embarrassed of ever. It's like,
right.
Will hold up forever. So
that's impressive. So when you were in high school, obviously, since you were interested in music and sports, Did you get good grades? Like, what were you interested in from?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of a B student, probably could have been an A student if I would have worked harder, but, I had so much going on. I was a skateboarder. I was very social. I was going to shows. So I just chose B's were just good enough for me because I knew I wasn't going to be going to UCLA or Berkeley. I knew I was going to go to a state college, and B's were plenty good to get into just about any state college. And I ended up going to Chico State, which, was a fun college town, which is pretty close to my hometown.
Mm-hmm. So did you always had the intention of going to college, and like that was always kind of part of your plan, or was that something you were okay? Because sometimes
always part of the plan.
Nice. What did you end up getting your degree in at Chico State?
In geography.
Yeah, and that's something that I was going to talk to you about as well, like how your job. I imagine the job that you got, obviously transitioning out of Chico State. That was the sort of, because you like, was it a cartographer or something?
Yeah, I was like a GIS specialist, which is geographic information specialist, which is like digital map making, but there's like data attached to it, like spreadsheets and information that you can, so each little squiggle on your computer has a table of information, and you can analyze stuff and do all sorts of stuff. So I worked for the federal government as a contractor for like 8 years. So right out of college, I did that. And then, I did the label on the side just as a hobby, just put out a couple records here and there just for fun.
Right.
And,
that's what impressed me too, because I remember you telling me, I was talking to you as you were still, I think you were in your last maybe like year and a half of working as a contractor, and you were sort of transitioning out to doing the label full time. But I was impressed because it's so funny. I just always have this notion of people that are involved in independent music. They have varied interests, but when you told me that you were a cartographer, I was like, who the fuck ends up being a cartographer? Like, that's just so random. It's so random. So like, how was that something that you got into in college?
Well, I love to travel, and, back when I was driving around doing road trips, you had freaking maps, because there were no GPSs. So I've always loved maps, and I've liked to travel, and I like how maps have a little bit of artistic graphic design to it, there's a little aesthetics involved with mapping. And, when you go and sit down your college major, it's like you go through all these, like, you want to do this? I'm like, no. You want to do this? No. I'm like, I knew I wanted to do something like science, like geology or geography or environmental science, because I was, kind of intrigued with, the environment, because I thought it was more interesting than just number crunching or economics. So I needed something more than just numbers.
Right. So something that kind of like had a creative element to it as well.
Yeah, exactly. And, I was always pretty good at geography. Like, I kind of know where the countries are, and I'm pretty good with cultures, and I already had kind of a leg up on people. Because I traveled right out of high school. I did my Europe trip, and I totally traveled all over the place. And,
So
geography it was, man.
Did you, so when you did the stereotypical after high school experience of going to Europe and backpacking and doing all that?
Yep, I think I did it 1 year after my first year of college, because I went to a junior college first, Butte College in Chico, and then I did it when I was 19. So I did it after my first year. It was pretty cool. I went with my brother for like 5 weeks. It was awesome.
Oh, nice. That's cool. It's always nice when you have someone who you get along with, because I've definitely heard horror stories of people being like, oh yeah, dude, best friends, go over for a month, and then by the end of the month they're like, I fucking hate that person. Like, they just they can't spend any more time with them. They're like, yo, let's take a year off from our friendship.
Yeah, no doubt.
And so like you said, obviously, as you were doing the, cartographer stuff, were your parents stoked on you kind of, like, did your dad have expectations of like, oh, Craig, you should probably be looking into a doctorate, or like, did they kind of let you forge your own path in a way?
Yeah, definitely. They never pushed me to like do anything I didn't want to do, because, you know, I had a goal, and, you know, I fulfilled them, and I got a job like right after college, so quick. So I was like already in this little career at a very young age, right out of college. So I kind of just fell into this position, this entry level position that, you know, taught me all about GIS. Because when I graduated, you don't know shit about it, you know. So
Right.
it's like this stuff you have to learn on the job because they don't teach it. So it was cool. I got basically taught this fancy computer system and got paid for it, you know, and it ended up, you know, I ended up moving up the ladder, you know, over the years. And, you know, I had a really good career, but then Devil Wears Prada and these other bands were just like getting big. And I was like, I can quit this day job business, and eventually did.
Right. Yeah. So like as you were, as that point started to come for you where it was like, all right, I need to either choose one or the other. Was that in some way, shape, or form a difficult decision for you to be like, all right, I'm turning down? Because I mean, government jobs, for anyone that doesn't know, like they pay really well. And I mean, I imagine you were getting paid, you know, like you said, you moved up the ladder, you worked hard, so you were.
Yeah, I mean, I was decent pay. I mean, I was definitely bought a house and, you know, could do all that stuff.
Yeah. And were you living up in like the same area? You hadn't moved to Portland yet, right? Because obviously.
Yeah, that was actually moved to Portland, got a job in Portland for the government agency, and then moved to Roseburg, Oregon, within that same government agency, but to a district office. So I was kind of like the leader of GIS out of this district office with like 200, you know, people.
Oh, got it.
Yeah.
And so like when you reached that fork in the road, you know, was it pretty agonizing for you to be like, oh man, I'm really taking a gamble, even though you knew that obviously things were going well with, you know, like you mentioned, the bands.
Yep.
Was it tough for you to kind of make that leap?
It was, because I had a good career. I had good insurance. You know, I had a steady paycheck, and, you know, I probably was pretty conservative. I probably could have quit my day job sooner than I did, but I wanted to just be really clear that the label could pay the bills and, you know, continue, you know, paying my mortgage and all that stuff. So
yeah, well, it seems like you've always struck me as a very, very practical person. Like you definitely, yeah, you definitely aren't like the sort of, hey, I'm going to throw caution to the wind. Fuck that. Like I'll dive right in. It's like, no, here's a spreadsheet. Yeah. Here's a spreadsheet. Here's everything that I need to make over the next like 5 to 10 years in order to feel like comfortable with what I'm doing.
Totally.
So, well, that's it. Yeah. It sounds like it was, like you said, it was difficult, but then something you had already kind of planned out. So
yeah, I had to do it. It was looking me straight in the eyes. It's like, here's your dream. I mean, at one point you got to just take it, you know, and not ever say coulda, shoulda, woulda. You know what I mean? So,
yeah.
And at that point, I kind of just knew. I was like, because, you know, after a while, you average so much from your distro and your merch. So after a while, there's just, you know, you're going to make this much, and, you know, this much is expenses and royalties, and this is yours. And, you know, you can kind of do some rough calculations and stuff. So definitely did it, and no looking back now.
It was obvious. It was obviously the wrong decision. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
And so, kind of as that stuff was hitting, like even before you had to kind of make that proverbial choice when the fork in the road came up, when did things start to feel, I guess, real for you as the label, where it was like, hey, I'm taking, you know, calls on the day job, like, you know, you were juggling a lot, and things really started to kind of like, holy crap, like maybe not even so much like sales numbers, or, you know, when your record started to chart on the Billboard charts, or, you know, when did it start to feel, I guess, kind of real for you?
Yeah, probably 2008, I'd say 4 years ago, right? And, you know, I think I quit my day job about 4.5 years ago or something like that. I kind of losing track, 4 or 5 years ago. So right during that time is when I knew, like, I was kind of, you know, not my day job. It was affecting my day job because I needed to do stuff for the label. And I was like, okay, I can't do this. I would get home and do like hours of work for the label go home, go to work the next day, and then do more label stuff after hours. And it was just like, I have to pick one. And, like I said, the money was coming in to justify it. And, so it was after that Devil Wears Prada, the Plagues record came out.
Mm-hmm.
And, Dance Gavin Dance was doing good. Emarosa was doing good. And a lot of my baby bands were selling a couple thousand copies, like no matter what, it seemed to be, even the baby band's first record still sell enough to make a profit, and it wasn't too risky. So.
Right. And kind of hitting on the, we were talking about obviously you being in Portland, and I always, like you said, you made a very deliberate decision to be there as a person. And I've always admired the fact that you've never really played by the proverbial quote unquote rules of, what a industry standard of like, dude, you got to be in LA, you got to be in New York, you have to be in these like central hubs of music. Yep. And you were always like, yeah, no, I'm just going to stay up here. I'll do my thing up here.
Exactly.
And then people had to obviously come and sort of be like, wait, who the fuck is this label up in Portland? Like, what does this make sense? I've just always thought that was really cool. And I imagine that was a very deliberate choice on your end as well, where you're just like, yeah, I don't ever want to move to those places.
Yeah. I mean, I like the small towns, big city feel Portland has, and LA, New York are awesome cities. And, I understand most industry people are there, but I feel like you said, I just feel no need. I have to be there. So, I could live wherever I wanted, right now. And, and I'm still here. I just feel like you just don't need to live there. I mean, you do need to travel there occasionally, but, that's easy.
Right. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I kind of like being off the grid a little bit. I like being under the radar. I think Rise is still kind of just under the radar still a little bit. And, we found our little niche, and I kind of like where we're at right here. So.
Yeah. And it's funny because I do see, I mean, obviously the label game has changed so much since, like, obviously, you and I both originally got into it, and like, it's in, the mid 90s is really when when independent labels like, Victor or whatever started to be able to, make a substantial amount of money off of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But the concept of, okay, it comes out on this record label, so I will buy it and I will trust it, like I said, like Victory, Fat Records, Epitaph.
Revelation.
Yeah. Exactly. Whereas like now that doesn't exist as much because, because kids are focused less on what comes out on a record label and more so like, oh, I like this band. I've seen obviously your approach, especially the past 2 years as a label, to be so diverse that first of all, you bum people out because people are like, what do you mean you're signing a band like the Acacia Strain and you put out hot water music?
Right.
People, that doesn't compute in a lot of people's heads, but they're just like, oh, that doesn't make any sense. But like we said, there's no allegiance to one record label. So was that kind of your, the point of like, all right, I will cherry pick the best bands of sort of each genre that I personally am into, and just kind of unleash it to the world?
You bet, man. Why not? I love all those bands, and I like several types of music, and I feel like by no means should Rise Records have one sound. I think that would be ridiculous. And no offense to labels that stick with one sound. I mean, whatever, but that's not us. And we do tend to stay under that in the all ages scene, which is very diverse. And it's great, so having Early November and Acacia Strain and Further Seems Forever and, Of Mice and Men, Sleeping with Sirens, Memphis May Fire, we all went to Warped Tour yesterday in Portland. We all had an after party at my office, and Transit was hanging out with Memphis May Fire, and Of Mice and Men was hanging out with Man Overboard, and it was cool just to see, these dudes just hanging out. It's like, they play different music, but still awesome, whether it's, I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think it's really interesting because even though I honestly do believe that Rise gets you as a label get a very hard time. Like, people rake you over the coals for whatever, millions of different detractors on the internet, which is obviously
Right.
you're used to it at this point.
Yeah, sure.
And it's like I find a lot of that, I guess hate unwarranted based on the fact that it's like you can't like a band like Sleeping with Sirens. It's like yeah, they may not be aware of bands like whatever Jawbreaker, Youth of Today, stuff that you and I are obviously very familiar with and like passionate about because that's what we grew up with. But you can't fault a person for either not being introduced to that or that just not being part of their cultural upbringing because they're younger. Like they have different
Right.
touchstones from their own musical upbringing.
Right.
And so I think that's even though a band like Man Overboard, who's obviously very in touch with that, versus a band like Of Mice and Men, who's not as in touch. It's like they still do come from the same sort of tree, but just different seeds. If that makes any sense.
Right. It's definitely true. And the critics that are so harsh, like, do they want everyone to think like them? I mean, that's really weird. I kind of like people to have free thinking and be able to like what they want and not be harassed for it. And I think it's a beautiful thing, diversity. Just like religion, like I respect everyone's religion and I respect everyone's like musical taste, and I'm not one to like, shit talk, but I'm used to it now, and we get a lot of hate, but that just means like you're getting bigger, you know what I mean? So it's like if people that hate you spend enough effort to like write on your message board or whatever, then I guess you're succeeding. So I'll take it as a compliment.
Right. So do you basically just use that as sort of fuel to fire, I presume?
I mean, I guess. I mean, I've been getting so much shit talk since Anatomy of a Ghost back in 2004.
You're like, I'm used to it now.
Yeah, the local bands hated Rise Records because we signed this shitty band called Anatomy of a Ghost, and they were all thinking their band's better and they should have got the record deal. So the jealousy turns to hate, and then, so it's been like 9 years of hate, but I'm used to it. And like I tell people, for like every one person typing this hate message, there's like 9 people that actually like it and just aren't commenting, that are just taking the information to themselves.
Right.
So
no, and that's good, because obviously it's like, I mean, at the beginning I'm sure it hurts, but then as you grow as a person, where you're just like, okay, well, I can't let that affect what I'm doing or what I want to accomplish with the label. It's like you just gotta take the lumps and move on from it.
Yep, totally.
And so when you were, I always find this interesting to hear from people's perspectives, but when you were kind of making that decision and, the record label was taking up more of your focus, like, did you have to have that discussion with your parents where it's like, hey, I'm going to quit this job that makes sense to you? Because, I mean, a record label doesn't make sense to parents. Like, that doesn't, they're like, oh, are you going to be Capitol Records, Craig? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, they were totally stoked and totally had my, yeah.
Oh, really? That's cool. So they had.
Oh yeah.
You tried to, like, were they kind of aware that things were going well for you, or was it kind of like, oh wow, like?
Oh yeah, I kept them in the loop. My dad and I would discuss it, and I mean, Ray, I'm an entrepreneur, man. I can't be making maps, dude. So my dad knew. My dad knows. I was selling cinnamon toothpicks in high school in 5th grade for like $1. You know what I mean? And like buying Nerds candy for like 40 cents and then flipping it for like $2 at lunchtime.
Dude, I actually, it was so funny because I had a discussion with somebody about this the other day where it was like, I talked to my mom about this too, where tell me if this sounds like something that you would obviously do. In elementary school, I, for whatever reason, thought it would be a good idea to take, like, I don't even know where I got these photographs, but like, because I wasn't printing them off, online, because that was in like 3rd grade. So, but I would I'd get a picture of, or no, it was baseball cards. I'm sorry. So I'd get a baseball card. I'd have my either mom or dad sign that card as that person. So like whatever, Jim Abbott, a pitcher for the Angels. I would have a card.
Right.
I'd have them sign Jim Abbott. I'd take it to school and I would try to sell it as if it were Jim Abbott's autograph.
Oh,
Dude, which, I mean,
bad.
I know retrospectively, I was like, holy fuck, like that's terrible. But like, I remember, like, I think it was after the third or fourth day where it's like I would bring, I sold a few cards to kids and I was stoked. And then my mom was like, hey, why am I signing these cards for you? And then I told her, I was like, Mom, I'm going to make a lot of money off of this. And then she totally was like, that you can't do that, Ray. Like that's ripping people off. And then I was like, oh, you're right. I'm sorry.
You could go to jail.
Totally. And so whatever. I mean, all's well that ends well. I learned. I gave the money back.
That's funny.
But yeah, but that's cool that you had that. Obviously, you had a more admirable hustle than I did. But yeah, of like of being like, yo, I can buy this for X amount of dollars, but sell it for Y at this.
Yeah, and I'm a happy customer. Like they wanted it. It's like, all right. It's like I'm not forcing them to buy it. The cinnamon toothpicks was insanely high profit margin because selling them for $1 a piece, I'd buy like a pack of 250 and get that cinnamon oil and dip it in there. So,
dude, that's incredible. So what was your first job in high school? Like kind of your first
job in high school was at a pet store in like freshman year when I was like actually 8th grade. Going into my freshman, I worked there for a couple summers.
Okay.
At this pet store, I was like the fish aquarium guy, the
sure.
Fish expert.
Sure. That's incredible.
Making $2.85 an hour because back then California could pay people under 18 like this super low wage, man. So it was ridiculous. I remember getting like $13 paychecks and I worked like all weekend and shit.
You're like this isn't even worth it.
Oh man, I needed something to do and I liked fish and I got to learn about that whole aquarium fish stuff.
Right. So where do you think that entrepreneurial spirit comes from? Like did your dad have that hustle? Did your mom have that hustle, or is that kind of just something you just did?
I think both my grandpas were kind of hustlers. Like my dad's dad was a businessman and sold like pipes, like conduit pipes, just like this weird niche industry, like had this Japanese business partner and in like pipes, weird stuff, like in Benicia, California, East Bay.
Sure.
And my other grandpa wasn't so much of a businessman. He was like a welder and then ended up doing some engineering type stuff later. But he kind of always wanted to be, but I don't think had the opportunity to like just do it. But they were both, my mom and dad not so much business hustlers, so it might have skipped a generation there.
Yeah, I think genetically that we can trace something back to that.
Yeah.
And sort of kind of like wrapping things up. Like you said, Rise has always been sort of like you said a niche, and you've always tried to keep the operation small and everything. And so now that the label is kind of where it's at, where it's like you've been able to weather the storm of the way the music industry has drastically changed. And
yep.
I'm sure you've been affected, but you've been able to adapt, and that's obviously why you've kind of the adjective of Rise Core, or whatever you'd like to call it, that people decided to put on your bands like 4 or 5 years ago. You're kind of, you do still have some of those bands, but you've obviously grown.
For sure.
You've grown past that, and not saying past that in a derogatory way, but just like, okay, here's these other genres of music that I really enjoy. And so kind of where you're poised right now, and looking, I guess, to the future, where it's just like, all right, you seem like a person where you're comfortable where everything is at, and you're not looking to make any insanely drastic changes where you're like, all right, I want to, fucking conquer the world, in the sense of like, I want to make every other record label obsolete.
Yeah, no way. It's, if right now it's like I have the, if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality,
Mm-hmm.
Because things are going great. I'm going to keep doing like what we're doing right now, which is, having a nice diverse roster with bands that want to tour a lot. And, keeping up on the social media, like video, we're pumping videos out. We think, that's kind of the best selling tool these days, or it's just like videos, visual stuff people can see on YouTube. You know, so we're going to just keep doing what we're doing. And I have no aspirations to like sell to a major or to be a huge label, and I don't want to crush other record labels or be competitive. I mean, sometimes we compete for bands, but you know, it is what it is, and you know, I'm not spiteful at all.
Right.
So.
Well, your personality strikes me as such, where it's like you're obviously dedicated to business and you're keeping your business's best interests at heart, but it's like, you know, you're a laid back surfer dude, and like.
Agreed. You know, I don't want conflict or turmoil. You know, I want both parties to be happy. I want, you know, a win-win. I like win-win situations. Like, you help me, I help you. We need each other, you know, which is true. Like, bands need record labels and record labels need bands, and, you know, they need fair deals. You know, we give good deals and don't want too much. You know, we're not trying to get too greedy. We need enough to do what we do, but not too much to like screw the artist over. So
right. No, and it's funny because it's like, you know, I think I've obviously seen online where it's like people, you know, like we were talking about the haters and detractors, where it's just like, you know, like you don't hear, you know, bands that whatever break up or leave Rise or whatever the case may be. It's like you really don't see a lot of the feedback from the bands as you might have seen where, you know, bands that leave, you know, not using them as a scapegoat, but like, you know, like Victory Records, like obviously bands leave the label and they're like lawsuits and et cetera, where it's like, at this point, you know, bands may immediately talk crap on Rise if they, you know, for whatever reason, you know, but at the end of the day, they're really not, they don't have a leg to stand on. They're like, oh, Rise sucks, but then they don't have anything to back that up.
I mean, legally they don't, because we pay royalties and we, you know, do what we do, you know. You live up
to your end of the bargain.
Yeah, totally. And, you know, we try, and just sometimes, you know, bands get bummed if they don't get huge, and sometimes we're the scapegoat and they're like, you didn't do this, and we're like, okay, well, we tried, man, you know, what else can we say? So
yeah,
but definitely there's not much to talk about Rise and artists, former Rise artists, just because we kind of treat our bands good, man. We pay them and we hang out with them when they come to Portland. We take them out to dinner and treat them good, and we talk to them on the phone all the time and help them get tours. So, you know, I think most bands realize that we're helping them, and, you know, haven't had any really bad apples. So it's been kind of nice.
Yeah, that's cool. And kind of, like I said, wrapping up, like kind of something that honestly didn't really strike me when we first started to talk on this conversation, but like it struck me now just in the middle of it, where it's like, you look at personalities within music that obviously have this very sort of winner takes all, no one else can exist besides my, whatever it is, record label, business venture. But, you know, they're basically egomaniacal in very many ways. It's like the record label is an extension of themselves, where it's just like, oh yeah, like if my record label is successful, that means that I am the shit, or I'm the best person in the world, or whatever their value is attached to that. Where it's just like, for you, it seems like as long as the label still is able to provide you the living that, you know, you're comfortable with, and you're able to kind of exist doing what you want to do, you know, like you'd be fine with that.
I agree. And I don't need much to have fun or be happy, because money doesn't buy happiness. And, you know, I'm a pretty simple guy, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think those
no
are
fancy watches or anything.
Yeah. You're not rolling to shows in your Bentley.
Nope. Don't have a Bentley, but, yeah, I wear $29 H&M pants, and I wear Vans, and
right.
You know, I have $100. I have a $100 pair of Docs. You know, so you know,
yeah,
I go big every once in a while, but some people wouldn't think that's going big. But I still think $100 is a lot for a pair of shoes. So
yeah, I don't think this interview could be left off at a better place than saying $100 shoes are too expensive. So I appreciate you hanging out with me, Craig, and yeah, I hope you had fun in some way, shape, or form.
Right on, Ray. I really appreciate it, and great talking, and I hope to see you in person soon, man.